morning. Again, not used to getting up here twice. Thank you all. Some of you know, some of you may not know. Thank you all for the prayers for our little ones this past week. Pretty rough past 2 weeks, but they're all well and tip-top shape this morning, as you can tell. Raylan looks like little pebbles walking through from Flintstones, if you recall that. Some of you are like, what's Flintstones? They're the vitamins you took as a kid, right? So I just really appreciate those prayers. Wednesday night we had to take Raylan into the hospital. She was so dehydrated from being sick, and it's pretty tough, but all's well. So songs like that we just sing are especially, they just they hit you, don't they? And when you hear the backstory behind it and everything, it's really powerful. If you would, turn with me to John chapter 9. We're going to make a bit of a jump this morning. John chapter 9. This is a story that many, if not most of us, are familiar with. And I want to lead into it with kind of one of those kind of slap your forehead moments that you have. I mean, am I the only one that's ever had that? Where you just you're like, oh, I had a professor in college. She called it the Tennessee flat hand. And she go, pah, When I was in college, I remember I used to pray a lot that I wouldn't have as bad as eyesight. I just prayed a lot for that. And there was one night I went to sleep, and I was really diligent. I used to wear contacts then. I was really diligent about taking my contacts out. And so I thought I had taken my contacts out. And so the next morning, I'm rolling out of bed, getting ready to go to class, and I'm wiping the sleep out of my eyes, and I look, and I'm like, wait a second, I can see. I can see. I was like, what? No way. I've been healed just out of nowhere. God just provided me with a miracle right here. And I'm just like, who do I need to call? I'm going to be telling some people. And then I go in the bathroom, I look in the mirror, and I realize, forgot to take my contacts out. And so, though I did not receive the miracle of sight, although I did get a lot of insight that day, the story we're going to talk about here from John chapter 9 is about the healing of the blind man. And I think this is a story that sometimes we miss some details because of over-familiarity with it. Jesus spits in some mud, it's kind of weird, puts it on dude's eyes, and he can see. It's just kind of a weird story, one we've heard from childhood. But this chapter is so rich. There's just so much subtlety and nuance and beauty here. And so I'm going to do my best to kind of get through it all this morning in the short 20 minutes I have. So in John chapter 9, we read that as Jesus passed by, he saw a man blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he would be born blind? There's this idea, and it's still making currents within religious thought today, or even in non-religious thought, right? That if you did something, if you have something terrible happening in your life, if you did something in your past, it's the reason for the turmoil you're facing today, right? And when we encounter hardships, the first thing we begin to do is kind of ostracize ourselves. Had I not done this, this wouldn't be happening today. Now, maybe I'm just speaking to the air, but I'd fair to say that this is a pretty prevailing thought process among people. Karma, that's kind of a current thing now, because it's a little less Christianized, I guess. But people think, well, I did this, and therefore. Now, for certain, there are consequences to our choices. Let's be clear about that. We all know that. And just because we find forgiveness doesn't mean we always find exemption from the consequences of the actions that we've taken. We all understand that. But we're talking about divine retribution here. We're talking about God. Does God punish people with things like this? blindness from birth because of something. And what's interesting here is in ancient times, they might even thought that he sinned within the womb before he was born, or his parents sinned. If you want to get a healthy dose of this kind of theology, read the book of Job. Job is full of this. The whole book of Job is kind of refuting this type of theology, this kind of idea. And so the disciples, well versed in this way of thinking, they see this man here. And I want to just make an observation too. They don't ask, how can we help the man? Or what does he need? No, they are content with contemplating the complexity and cause of his blindness. And so Jesus here, it's really interesting that Jesus here says something completely contrary to what they were thinking. Jesus answered, "It was neither that this man sinned, nor his parents, but it was that so that the work of God, or works of God, might be displayed in him." Now, does this mean that this man was given blindness just so God could do this thing? I don't think that's what Jesus means. Jesus, I like what one author put here. He said, Jesus pointed the question away from why and rather onto the idea, what can God do with this? Because I think fundamentally we know why this happens. We live in a cursed and broken world. And it's not people come into this world injured, hurt, ill, not due to any fault of their parents very often. There's a rare exception, someone was on drugs or something like that might have caused them to have these things. But those things excluded, we live in a hurting world, right? People have confusion, people have misunderstanding, people have illnesses. This is the world, the reality of the world that we're living in. It's not due to any of their sin. It's due to the first man's sin that has ushered in something ever since. That God has not turned away from, but is doing something about. And we're going to talk about that in just a second. But in the midst of our pain and our suffering, our ailments or afflictions, whether it's physical or spiritual, can we, I think as a society, we kind of just can't get past this question of why. Like we just get stuck there. And it's interesting that in the Bible, they very seldom ask the question why. The better question was, how long? Not why is this happening, but how long am I going to have to endure this? How long, Lord, before you bring me relief? Like those kinds of things. But can we trust God to move beyond our whys and ask, what can he do with this? What can he do with this thing in my life? This sickness, this struggle, this failure, whatever it is, what can God do with that? And so he said, so that the works of God might be displayed in him, we must work the works of him who sent me as long as it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. And he's making an allusion to the end times. Okay? Today is still day. Today's still the time to work. Today's still, the fields are still white on the harvest. People are in need, and we have the capacity to reach out with the gaze and hand of love. But there's coming a day that's not a day at all, it's night, when that opportunity will be no longer. And that's what he's pointing to. So the work is urgent, right? People are in need, and the work is urgent. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world. I want you to think back, and I asked Trace, and Trace, you did a great job. Any book I write, I want you to just do the audio book for it, because your voice is amazing, Trace. but this passage here, Trace did a great job reading John 1, and John is pointing us back to that, right? John is saying that Jesus was the light that pierced the darkness at the dawn of creation. He's also the light that pierces the darkness of our spiritual depths and brings us into salvation today. And so he is still the light of the world. And what does he do? What did God do at the beginning of creation when he formed man? Well, he took clay, right? He took dust, and he breathed into it. Well, it's interesting because he's doing something really similar here. When he had said this, he spat on the ground and made clay of the spittle and applied the clay to his eyes and said to him, "Go wash in the pool of Siloam," which is translated sent. So he went away and washed and came back seeing. There's something profound here about what Jesus is doing. Because all throughout, Jesus isn't just arbitrarily healing people all throughout the scriptures. Some get healed, yes. Some do not. But those points of healing, those points of contact, are the points of contact between the kingdom reality and our present experience. It's like when you encounter Jesus in the law, when you have that touch point, I always like that, I think Michelangelo painted, the creation of Adam, right? And God's out there and Adam, and their fingers are just like, you just want to touch them together, right? But it's this distinction, right? That small gap is immeasurable because it shows that we are not God. We are from Him, but we are not Him. But we are looking up towards Him. I like that picture. And I think what we see here is when the kingdom comes near and touches us, it opens us. It opens our heart. It opens our minds. It opens our eyes so we can see God. Right? They're saying, "Oh, this guy must be a terrible sinner. His parents must have been terrible sinners." And Jesus is saying, "No. This is an opportunity for the kingdom to touch you." So these points in our life, these sufferings, instead of asking where they come from, ask, what is God going to do with it? What is God going to do with it? And so, just like at the original creation, He is the light of the world. He pierces the darkness. He creates people. He makes them from clay and breath. And here, He's doing something very similar. And then He comes back and He sees. Therefore, the neighbors of those who previously saw Him as a beggar were saying, "Is not this the one who used to sit and beg?" Others were saying, "This is he." Still others were saying, "No, but he is like him." He kept saying, "No, I am the one." So they were saying to him, "How then were your eyes opened?" And he answered, "The man who is called Jesus made clay and anointed my eyes and said to me, 'Go to Siloam and wash.' So I went away and washed, and I received sight." They said to him, "Well, where is he?" He said, "I don't know." It's interesting. We're going to get into this right now, but they are not praising that he now is seeing. So first it was the disciples, the one who walked daily with Jesus. They should have known it. Now it's the religious leaders who spent their entire lives, the scholars, spent their entire lives studying the law, studying the Word. They should have known better, right? They should have known better. So they brought to the Pharisees the man who was formerly blind. Now it was a Sabbath on the day when Jesus made the clay and opened his eyes. Then the Pharisees also were asking him again how he received his sight. And he said to them, "He applied clay to my eyes, and I washed, and I see." Therefore some of the Pharisees were saying, "This man is not from God, because he does not keep the Sabbath." So the disciples did not want to do anything to help his condition. They just wanted to think about why he was in that state. The Pharisees, who were really the champion of, they get a bad rap, but they were really the champion of the people. Very devoted. Many of them crucified in the 1st and 2nd centuries. Very, very devoted people as a whole, but also sometimes pursuing their own agendas and having an outward appearance of deceit. So when we hear this story, when we think about this event, think about a couple things. In the midst of my present circumstances, We have very little control over the things in our life. And the sooner we understand that, the more at peace we are. I've come to a point some time ago that I can't control outcomes. All I can control is input. I can control nothing but the choices that I am confronted with and the decisions I make. These circumstances, these things that are in our life, whether we like them or not, they're there. If you continue to stay in the why trap, it will bog you down and you will lose heart. If you can elevate your sight above that and say, what can God do through this? You will endure and you will see a glory you will never realize. Most of the beautiful things that happen in the world come on the opposite side of terror. I don't like that, but that's the way it is. So whatever you're going through right now, ask, what can God do through this? Second, will you be a touch point for His glory in someone's life? Please don't be, usually I'd say, be like the disciples. Don't be like the disciples here. Right? Because sometimes they just didn't get it. And sometimes I take great piece of that, because a lot of times I don't get it. And God has to kind of, coach me along and kick me in the bottom a few times, get with it, Matthew. And, but also, don't let the needs of others go by when you feel God convicting you to intervene. Be a touch point for His kingdom. We are the people of the kingdom of God. Bring His healing everywhere you go. There's a quote I want to end with. It's from Charles Spurgeon, a little more modern than the 4th century person I read last time. He's 18th century. No, 19th century, 1800s. It says, whenever you see a man in sorrow and trouble, the way to look at it is not to blame him and inquire how he came to be there, but to say, here is an opening for God's almighty love. Here is an occasion for the display of the grace and goodness of the Lord. As you go out this week, may you have that attitude. May that be your heart. May when you see others in need, because they're everywhere, you not say, well, it's their own fault. Can't believe they made so many poor choices. They should have just done better. Well, yes, they should have. And many people probably know that very well. I find that most people have a deep sense of their own failings. There's a few people who, think they walk on water. There's only one who did that. But majority of people have a deep sense of their failures. They don't need you to heap it upon them. What they need you to do is give them the look of love and help them to not stay there, but to pull them up. This morning, that's our call as the church as we stand and sing.